Howdy, friends and neighbors. I say that because quite a few players and coaches I talk about are, or at one time, were my neighbors. If not down the street, then, as the saying goes, 2 towns over. Joe Kapp lived in the town right next to the town I lived at. We passed through that town each time we come up to the hill. Joe Kapp passed away a few months ago. He was one of my favorite quarterbacks after Johnny Unitas, but now Joe Kapp is my favorite. Man, is that guy entertaining. Plus, he's a really nice guy, and he does not hold back on anything. As a 5-year-old, I saw Joe Kapp play on TV, and I've been watching his highlights for decades. I became a Viking fan for 2 reasons. The purple jersey and helmet. The other, my grandpa and dad were big Cal Bear fans, and they saw Joe play many times. And whoever they liked, so did I. Dad doesn't have many football player autographs. He said they didn't let you go down on the field. It even says it in those game day programs. It says how it's for your safety. I mean, even back in the 50s, those nutty college kids would storm the field, and yeah, you could get hurt. Staying with the football theme to coincide with the start of Monday Night Football. For over 50 years, we've had Monday nights with football to look forward to. So we'll keep the series moving with another football player autograph. He was called the Toughest Chicano by Sports Illustrated Magazine. Most folks didn't need a magazine to tell them that. Just watch him play. There's a lot of good stories about Joe Kapp, and I've been planning to do a show proper on him, but I don't want to shortchange a legend. So I'll do another show later with Cal Bear programs, and I have his 2 last top cards. For this episode, we'll just do a quick bio and hit a few highlights. As far as stats, I really don't put those in my shows anyway. Besides, quarterbacks back then weren't concerned about their stats. That's one reason they threw a lot of picks. It was just part of the game. There's a lot of great quarterbacks in NFL history that have more picks than touchdowns, and I'm thinking some of those picks were thrown while they were concussed. I mean, how many times have you heard players talk about not remembering a game they just finished playing in? I saw a clip of Joe Kapp sitting in his garage. He was holding one of his old football helmets. He started rapping on it with his knuckles. The sound that helmet made, it sounded like a formica countertop. And whatever those helmets were made out of, it's no wonder there were so many players getting their face broken and knocked unconscious. All helmets can be used as weapons, but some weapons are more dangerous than others. So let's go. Born in New Mexico, but raised in California. And for a while, would live in the farming town of Salinas, which you are looking at right now on the left. That is Salinas, overlooking the Monterey Bay. Joe went to high school in Newhall, California, and would attend Berkeley University and played basketball under Hall of Fame coach Pete Newell. And who do you think came off the bench and still led the team in personal fouls? Yep, Joe. But what made him a Cal Bear legend was his play on the gridiron. And he quickly became not only one of the great quarterbacks in Cal Bear history, but probably the most popular. In the 1958 football season, Joe Kapp would lead the Cal Bears to the Pacific Coast Conference Championship, and the Bears were invited to play in the Rose Bowl, a game they would lose and haven't been back since. Joe Kapp was awarded the W.J. Voit Memorial Trophy for the most outstanding player on the Pacific Coast, and he held the team quarterback rushing record until just a couple of years ago. Joe was selected in the 18th round in 1959, picked number 209 by the Washington Redskins, which meant they owned his rights to play football in America, and they never contacted Joe. I guess because they had Eddie LeBaron, who just came off back-to-back Pro Bowl seasons. So if the California boy wanted to play football in 1959, he would have to head north and play in Canada. So that's what he did with the Calgary Stampeders. And in his second season with the team, got them to the playoffs, which hadn't happened in years, making him a hero in that city. That's despite playing the whole season with a bad knee that was heavily wrapped for every game, and he didn't miss one. In 1961, the BC Lions traded 4 starters for Joe Kapp, and it paid off, because in 1963, he got them to the championship. Joe and the BC Lions would return to the title game in 1964, this time winning the Grey Cup, becoming CFL champs. But by 1967, Joe was looking to come home to the U.S., and at the same time, the Oilers, Chargers, and the Raiders of the AFL were looking for a quarterback. But Joe decided to team up with Coach Bud Grant, who he knew from the CFL as a proven winner. Both men would leave the cold Canadian weather for the welcoming climate of Minnesota and join the Vikings for the 1967 season. The multiplayer trade between the CFL and NFL was one of the rare times these two leagues transacted with each other. It's complicated and a lot of legal stuff went on. Mr. Joe Kapp is in the Cal Bears Hall of Fame, the College Football Hall of Fame, the CFL Football Hall of Fame, the BC Sports Hall of Fame, and the BC Lions retired his number. And Joe Kapp is the only player to quarterback in a Rose Bowl, a Super Bowl, and the Grey Cup. So for the start of the 1967 season, Joe Kapp was a 29-year-old rookie for the Vikings. And in 1968, he led the team to the playoffs for the first time in the young franchise's history. And he would soon cement himself into Viking lore forever. Joe Kapp was a proven leader who would play hurt and would hurt you. And unlike most quarterbacks who avoid contact, Joe would look for the contact. He wanted to put it on you. He was 6'2", around 220 pounds, and coming at you with intent. Check out the footage of Joe literally running over Browns linebacker Jim Houston, knocking him instantly unconscious. He was the type of leader that players respected and listened to because he led by example and would do what he said he was going to do. And when he looks you in the eye, you had better do what you're supposed to do, or you're going to have Joe in your face. Joe Kapp's toughness is legendary in the CFL and the NFL, and has been for generations. Odds are, if he wasn't forced by the league to wear that one-bar face guard, he probably wouldn't wear one at all. Crazy or tough? He was a little bit of one and a lot of the other. A macho man who brought that word macho into the American lexicon. Filled with grit, determination, desire, whatever you call it. Joe had it all and in abundance. It rubbed off on you, inspiring you to play better, not only for yourself, but for the team. All those who played against Joe and looked him in the eye from across the line of scrimmage, and those in the huddle with Joe looking directly into his eyes, they all said it. He's the type of leader you want on your side, the type of football player who would put his own body on the line to get not only a victory or a touchdown, but Joe Kapp would stand in the pocket knowing he was going to take a big hit and then take that hit just to get the first down. Play after play, yard by yard, because that's how champions do it. The highlight reels of Joe taking it and dishing it out are some of the best out there. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was no real definition of unnecessary roughness. And the action didn't always stop just because the ref blew his whistle. Even if you cross a goal line, you're 5 yards deep in the end zone, the ref has already blown his whistle, thrown his hands in the air, and you're thinking the play is over. And about to hand the ball to the ref when out of nowhere, from behind, here comes Hall of Famer Dave Wilcox with his arm cocked back, flying in and swings it like a baseball bat upside Joe's head, knocking him flat, but not out. Joe never saw it coming, with two refs watching the whole thing. No flags. That's just how football was played on Sundays back then. It was violent and could be brutal. Many of those players fought in wars, so their idea of violent or dirty play is nothing compared to what they encountered in war. I think they considered what they did to a player on the playing field is no comparison to what they went through on the battlefield. One is a life and death situation, the other just a game. Joe Kapp tied the NFL record in 1969 when he threw 7 touchdown passes in a revenge game against the defending NFL champs, the Baltimore Colts. It was the second game of the season at Vikings Metropolitan Stadium, and in that game, Joe had already thrown 6 touchdown passes when Hall of Famer Bubba Smith broke Joe's wrist, forcing him out of the game. But when Joe's teammates found out he was only 5 yards away from breaking Fran Tarkenton's Viking record for passing yards in a game, he went back in the game, smashed that record, and then threw a touchdown pass to tie the NFL record with 7 touchdowns in one game. He did that with a broken wrist. But wait, Joe's not done yet. He would re-enter the game for the second time with his broken wrist because Gary Quazzo got his nose broken. You don't hear about things like this happening nowadays. When's the last time you heard about a player getting his nose broken in a game or a quarterback playing with a broken wrist that he just broke in that game? Stories like that is why Joe Kapp is regarded as one of the toughest, not only quarterbacks, but football players in history. In 1969, Joe led the Vikings to victory in the NFL championship game and then to Super Bowl IV. Joe Kapp was voted to the Pro Bowl and was second in the MVP voting behind Roman Gabriel. That's probably the first time a Mexican and a Filipino competed for the NFL MVP. Prior to the start of the 1969 season, the Vikings exercised the option clause on Joe's contract, but did not offer him a new one. This was unusual. Joe played the entire season without a new contract. This would make him a free agent by the league's own rules for the 1970 season. But not a single team contacted Joe during the 1969 offseason, not even the Vikings. So let's see, Joe was second MVP. His team won the NFL championship, yet not one team's interested? The amount of physical punishment Joe took was one thing, but I never knew about the mental abuse, if you want to call it that, messing with a man's livelihood, all those years of legal wranglings with the NFL, and how the commission owners colluded in order to punish Joe for making waves in the NFL and not signing a standard contract. But when they prevent you from playing because of a contract that you signed following the NFL's own rules, that's not right. All this coming off that historic 1969 season that Joe dubbed 40 for 60. 40 men for 60 minutes. Joe Kapp would lead those 40 men to a 12-2 record, beating first the Rams in a come-from-behind victory in Minnesota, then, as they say, single-handedly beat the Cleveland Browns defense with his spectacular play in the NFL championship game, which would be the last NFL championship game because NFL and AFL would merge in 1970. It would be the Boston Patriots, 2 games into the 1970 season, that went against the grain and signed Joe to a 4-year contract, making him the highest paid player in the NFL. So Joe Kapp goes from throwing 19 touchdowns and 13 picks and leading his team to the Super Bowl to signing with Boston and getting killed week after week, ending the season with 3 touchdown passes and 17 picks, and the worst record in the league. To rub salt in that wound, after the 1970 season, Commissioner Pete Rozelle ordered Joe to sign the standard NFL contract. Joe said no. Again, more lawyers. And when Joe shows up to the Patriots Training Camp in 1971 to honor his 4-year contract, he was again asked to sign the NFL standard contract. Again, Joe said no, and never played football again. Okay, I kind of cheated. It's not really a football autograph in the thumbnail. That's Joe Kapp's basketball autograph when my dad went to one of his basketball games back in the 50s. Close enough. So, the 1969 season is over. The Vikings are not the Super Bowl champs, but they are the NFL champs, and that's nothing to sneeze at. So now we're sitting at a fancy dinner table, and everybody is dressed up because it's the Vikings' end of the season banquet. And the players have already decided who's the team MVP. There's no question who it is. It's Joe Kapp. He's asked to come up to the microphone. So Joe reluctantly makes his way to the podium where the MVP trophy sits on a table. He's wearing a suit and tie, like everyone else is. And then the team leader addresses the room full of Vikings, staff and families, and says this, quote, "There is no most valuable Viking. There's only 40 most valuable Vikings. It's 40 for 60, put it that way. I just can't accept this. Thank you." And he walked back to his seat, leaving the trophy at the podium. How cool is that? That's a real classy move from a true leader of men who not only had to deal with some of the worst weather and some of the meanest players in pro football history, but on top of that, he had to fight a league and all its lawyers for most of his career, making Joe Kapp the toughest Chicano.